Okay, so hello everybody. I am doing a heal Zoolock guide, and it's going to be the fully made guide. I'm going to come out with the budget guide tomorrow. And before I really get into this, I'm just going to say that I know that a lot of my guides in the past have been kind of long, and so this one I'm going to try to be at least a little bit quicker and more concise rather than the rambling on. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. For all of you that don't know how these guides work, basically it's broken into 3 parts. 1, where I talk about the overview of the deck. 2, changes you can make to make the deck either better or more budget, depending on what kind of guide it is. And 3, matchups and mulligans for certain matchups. So, without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it. The overview of the deck, it's a pretty aggressive deck where you don't necessarily want to make too many trades, but you can if you need to because you have a fungal enchanter that can heal your board up. And you also have just pretty strong minions in general that can allow you to make some value trades if needed, especially with the Prince Keleseth buff, or trading a Flame Imp, a 3-2, into something bigger like a 4-3, or anything like that. But for the most part, this deck is a mostly face-oriented deck that builds up a wide board, not as wide as, say, Odd Paladin or even Shaman, but still a wide board. And basically, you just want to try to get a really good board state with Soul Infusion, buffing up some minions, preferably a Doubling Imp or a Serenite Chain Gang. You want to have a Silence ready to get over a big taunt, and really focusing a ton on that early game with literally half of your deck, 15 of your 30 cards being 1 cost. Like, the entire purpose of this deck is to get a really good early game and hopefully heal your face and get out a Happy Ghoul in the first 3 turns for free. You also have a Fungal Mancer in order to buff up your, buff up the minions on the board, and a Mossy Horror in order to get over a Spreading Plague play or a Giggling Inventor play. Changes you can make to the deck are basically, if you want to make it cheaper, is take out the Solarium. So basically the legendaries in the epic. The Solarium, Prince Keleseth, the Blood Knight, and the Mossy Horror. Most of which are either... The epics are teched in for the Giggling Inventor. The other 2, the Solarium and Prince Keleseth, they're just really solid staple cards in this deck that are absolutely incredible. And put them in for the Vulgar Homunculus, because you can now put that in due to the fact that you have now... You can now have 2 mana minions in your deck. Put in an extra Doubling Imp, because I took out 1. And put in a Raid Leader. And with that, the deck now becomes less than 1600 dust, so pretty much anybody can build it. And I have climbed pretty successfully with both versions of the deck. And gotten to a pretty high rank with both. One of them was rank 4, one was at rank 3. And honestly, I feel like that's a pretty good climb. Especially considering the rank 4 one is with the budget version of the deck that has a 64% win rate. But I'm not talking about that deck right now. I'm talking about the fully made deck. But those are basically the changes you can make in order to make the deck more budget. If you want to make it better, potentially putting in another Blood Knight and or Mossy Horror in case you're playing against a lot of Druids with Spreading Plague or control decks with Giggling Inventor. If you're not playing against a ton of those, I think this is the optimal list, and you'll see it on the right because there'll be a lot of games being played in the background, but this is what I think the optimal list is for the most part. Some people might choose to take out a Serenite Chain Gang or a Doubling Imp. I choose to take out a Doubling Imp because the Serenite Chain Gang, the taunt, and the extra health on each one is pretty helpful in a lot of situations. So really, that's up to you for things you take out to tech in at new cards, but for the most part, Optimalist is right here, and I told you what you could do to make the deck more budget. So, let's just jump right into the matchups, because I played this deck a lot. I've played about 100 games with this deck, and this is the deck that I decided to try to climb the Legend with, and I got to rank 3, and I've been wanting to change up the deck for a little bit, so I'm playing Odd Rogue now, but that's not important. Point is, I can give you a very detailed list on the certain matchups, so I'll just jump right into it. Druid, I'm surprised that this is a fairly even matchup. I think that it should be bad. The internet says that it should be good, and it turns out to be like almost 50% matchup. Basically, the goal of the deck is to get a really strong board and cheese stuff out before they can ramp up and get into a Spreading Plague, and then you can finish them off with like a Soulfire or a Doomguard. And that's basically what you want to do, but a lot of the times you're not going to get that perfect hand. Flame Imp into Voodoo Doctor into Happy Ghoul on turn 1. That's just not going to happen every single game. And obviously it will happen, or something along those lines will happen, or you'll be able to get the Happy Ghoul out like turn 2 or something. Or you'll be able to get multiple Happy Ghouls out, and obviously you can pop off. But in games where you don't pop off, the Druid has enough time to rebuild. And the reason why I know this is because I played a little bit of Druid at one point because I was having a hard time into the Druid matchup, so I decided to try to look into that matchup a little bit. And in the Druid matchup, I could not have been more even against the Warlock. It was like a 50-50 chance. If the guy popped off, I won. If the guy didn't pop off, I won. And that was basically how it went every single time. So the Druid matchup is pretty even. You either pop off or you don't, and if you don't, he's probably going to win. You can definitely mulligan to make it more often for you to do well, especially if you get a Prince Keleseth. Like, if you get a Prince Keleseth, the amount of tempo you can gain from that is insane. And in every single situation, you want to keep Prince Keleseth. Speaking of keeps, real quick, because I didn't talk about that, mulligans, and this mulligan is pretty much the same in every single situation except a few where I'll talk about. Flame Imp, #1 keep. Kobold Library, like, all of the 1-drops are pretty high priority, but Flame Imp is the #1, like, the best thing. The only card I would keep over Flame Imp is a Prince Keleseth, but I don't see why you would ever need to make that choice. Other than that, Flame Imp, hopefully another 1-drop, Prince Keleseth, or if you think you're going to be playing into, like, an aggressive matchup or something that everyone's giggling, you might want a Blood Knight or something, but for the most part, 1-drops in Prince Keleseth, with Flame Imp being the best 1-drop to get. Other than that, Soulfire doesn't count as a 1-drop in this situation, although Soul Infusion does. Like, Soulfire is the only 1-drop, along with the Solarium, that I wouldn't necessarily keep. Okay, so, back to the matchups. The next matchup, is Hunter. Into Death Rattle Hunter, you can pop off and get a good enough board with early game in order to beat them before they pop off with all of their Death Rattles. The same goes for Spell Hunter, and the reason why it's better than the Druid matchup is because you don't have to pop off as hard to win. The Hunter can definitely get very out of control with the Death Rattle Hunter, but it takes a little while to set up, and they're not able to gain 12 armor in 1 turn like a Druid is with Branching Paths, and that's assuming they only play 1. The Hunter is fairly limited in how much life that they can gain, unless they get Rexar and get Lifesteal, in which case that's a matchup you'll probably end up losing. But for the most part, what you want to do is you just want to go standard aggro, don't really trade much, unless he coins out the egg. If he coins out the egg, I might actually trade into the egg, especially if you can play like a 1-3 taunt or something in front of it, that way he can't kill your other minions. Because if he coins it out, that probably means he has something else to proc the Death Rattle for free anyway, and you don't want to have to deal with that. But for the most part, going face, especially if it's Spell Hunter, because you want to be able to proc those traps and deal with them as soon as possible. Basically, just go standard aggro. Into Mage, this deck beats Tempo Mage pretty hard. You wouldn't think so, because of all the damage you take in order to get your deck rolling. But it's actually pretty good, especially considering you get health, and you can trade into the minions that the Tempo Mage makes. You can definitely just trade into the 3-2 Sorcerer's Apprentice so he can't get cheap spells. You can trade the 3-2 into the 4-3 the Tor Mage, so when he plays that for a free secret, really his big minions just getting killed right off the bat. And honestly, you can trade into a lot of the minions without too much punishment, and you get a wide enough board that the Tempo Mage can't really deal with it. Big Mage, on the other hand, harder to deal with, but you can draw so much that you can refill the board if he wipes it until one of you runs out of resources. And my one loss is against a Big Mage, and it's just I ran out of resources first. I drew cards, and he had Dragon's Fury on turn 5, which, if they have that, you're probably going to lose anyway. Playing that alone on turn 5 probably just wins the Mage the game. If they don't do it, you have a pretty good chance of winning, or at least making it close. But if they have Dragon's Fury on turn 5, you're probably going to lose. It's that simple. Basically, going standard aggro is pretty good into this matchup. There's nothing really special you need to do. If you're playing against big, maybe hold something back. You don't need to necessarily play everything, especially if you like already have a ton of damage on board. And that's the only thing I can really tell you about that specific matchup. Next is Paladin. I've played against 2 odd Paladins, and basically, if you get that Despicable Dreadlord and drop it down, you basically win the game because they can't get a single Silverhand recruit on the board after that. And also, you build up a pretty wide board and can make a ton of value trades. With like a 1/3 Voidwalker, you can kill 3 of his Silverhand recruits, and you have ways of healing up yourself and your minions, so really, he never has enough pressure on the board to make you worry, and you eventually build up enough of a board to kill him. Priest, I never know how to judge Priest. It's just not a deck you play that much. It's the second least popular deck, or the least popular deck, with about tied with Druid, although I've played a few more Druids in total than I have Priests throughout my other decks experiences. But into Priest, really just go standard aggro again. Nothing really too special about it. Into most of these matchups, you want to go standard aggro, actually. Very infrequently do you want to trade unless you're playing against a deck that like revolves around a certain card, like the 2/4 that the Druid has that summons a dragon. If you have the opportunity to trade into that and kill it, or maybe just even soulfire it, do it. You don't need to do the extra damage. You need to kill that creature first. It is the top priority. And like in Rogue, when they have the 4/4 Thug, if you can trade into that and kill it before it gets out of hand, you do that. So most of the time it's standard aggro, and I don't know why I'm going super in-depth into this when I'm talking about Priest, but if you don't know what kind of deck you're playing against, just go standard aggro. It's what you do against Druid, because it can be any of like 5 pretty common decks for Druid, or Priest, it could be any number of uncommon decks, and you just gotta go aggro and hope that they don't wipe your board. And the Rogue's an interesting one, because I think that technically speaking, they should beat me in this matchup, beat this deck, because a lot of the decks are odd Rogue and are able to kill your minions before you are able to like build up a board with this weapon. However, near the end of this, when I was making these videos and climbing with this deck, I started playing against more quest rogues, and they weren't necessarily able to kill your minions with the 1/2 weapon, and were not as aggressive in terms of creatures, so they couldn't kill your minions, which means that you were able to build up a board and potentially rush them down. So, and depending on how the meta shifts in terms of Rogue, I could see this deck doing well into the Rogue matchup in the future if more Quest Rogues are played than the Odd Rogues, because Odd Rogue, the 2/2 weapon can kill your Flame Imp and it can kill your Light Warden, which are 2 things that are cheap but can snowball out of control and things that you would prefer to live. The next matchup is Shaman. Shaman's okay. It's an okay matchup. It's slightly below 50%, although I would say it's like around 50% if I played more games. I think that it loses to Even Shaman pretty badly because of all of the value trades and pinging potential from the Even Shaman. But Shudderwalk, you can rush them down fast enough, especially if you're able to like build up a board, but not enough of a board to where if he gets wiped, you're devastated, but enough to bait out his removal, which is usually around 3 to 4 minions. So maybe hold back a minion or 2 in that case, and he'll Lightning Storm or Volcano immediately, and then you can rebuild the board, get a turn or 2 of attacking before he gets his next wipe, but only keep it at like 3 or 4 minions, or buff up some of the minions. That way, if he has a Lightning Storm to remove it, some of your things might live. And it's also good because with the Lightning Storm, if some of your 3 health minions live, you can Fungal Enchanter in order to bring them back up to full health, because it did, well, 2 to them. And that matchup's not terrible for you. I wouldn't say it's necessarily good, but it's winnable, especially if you play around removal correctly. So that's a pretty skill-based matchup, and I feel like it could be above 50% if you played it better. And as I learned how to play into this matchup, I feel like I could have brought it above 50% a little bit. Warlock, it's either mirror or even, or control, and you're supposed to lose in the even and control because of all the value that they end up getting and the big taunts that get in your way, but I ended about a 50% win rate because one of my biggest mistakes is playing into Defile, and I have been a little bit better about that, so I think that just focusing on that makes it a little bit of an easier matchup, but also never fully committing to the board so a wipe would devastate me has also allowed me to win some games. However, sometimes you do need to fully commit if you're running out of cards in hand and you're like, well, I have to fully commit now because if he wipes me anyway, I'm probably going to lose. So if you need a Hail Mary, obviously go for it. But for the most part, in these matchups, the controls and the evens, you don't want to super overcommit, and you have to play a little bit slower because you're probably going to get killed if you don't. But since they do damage to themselves, the reason why you're allowed to go slower is because they actually do enough damage to themselves to where you don't need to commit as many minions to doing it, if that makes sense. Like, all of their life taps mean that you don't necessarily need to get the minions on the board to do the damage because they're doing damage to themselves. And they can heal up a little bit, but if they don't get all of the cards they need to heal up, and you still have a decent board presence, you can close out the game. But overall, there's a mirror match, and 2 matchups that are supposed to be bad for you, but I was able to squeak out with a 50% win rate, which means it's definitely possible. I'm not even like an amazing player or anything. I'm not going to claim that I am. But yeah, this matchup, pretty good for you. Not pretty good, pretty okay for you. It's like exactly 50%. The last one is your worst matchup, and that's Warrior. And just gaining 4 armor every turn is absurd, and I hate it. And Warrior makes me the angriest of any class in the game. Like, gaining 4 armor a turn, having a ton of armor and removal, and every single deck I've played into Warrior, literally every single deck. Token Druid, Odd Paladin, Odd Rogue, this deck. What other decks have I tried here? I mean, this isn't super important for this deck specifically, but, you know, I'm going to talk about it anyway. Even Shaman, Spell Hunter, all losing matchups into this deck. I personally think that if you guys have the dust to do it, go for Odd Warrior. It's absolutely insane. If you can learn how to pilot that deck, the win rates could be phenomenal. But I mean, I'm giving you a guide on the Zoolock deck right now, and honestly, it's cheaper and still pretty good, and you can really crank out a ton of games, so your climb can potentially be fast with this deck, to be honest. So, just a rundown, yeah, on average, want to go pretty aggressive into every single matchup. Into Warrior and Druid, fully committing is not an issue. Because you're like, okay, well, if they wipe my board, I'm going to lose anyway. They have so much sustain. They have armor. You want to do that. But into Warlock, the control deck, you might want to play slower because they do enough damage to themselves and don't have as much heal or armor. So it's very easy for you to play a little bit slower, play around the control, and not have to go all in because they won't have as much health. The reason why I have to go all in on the other 2 decks is because they have so much armor and so much taunt and so much just, health. The only way you can win is if you can do a ton of damage fast, but into Warlock, you can be a little slower. Into the more aggro and mid-range decks, this deck does pretty well because you can cheese out things, you have heal for your board, and into the Odd Paladin matchup, you have the Despicable Dreadlord to wipe the board over and over and over again. Your best matchup is the Tempo Mage because, surprisingly enough, you don't do enough damage to yourself to where the spells alone can kill you, especially considering you have multiple ways of healing yourself in terms of minions. And you have enough minions to get a board presence that allows you to keep his minions from doing damage to you. So he's really only trying to kill you with spells. And the worst matchup is Warrior, just because Warrior's the worst in the game. I hate it. It's a terrible class. It's a terrible deck because you can gain... I'm sorry, I'm getting too salty about this, but point is, Warrior is your worst matchup because of all of the health and armor and taunts that they have. Other than that, a lot of the other matchups are in your favor or around 50%. Like Paladin and Hunter and Rogue, I'd say, are in your favor. And then Druid, Shaman, Warlock are about even. And Priest are about even. Maybe a little bit less than, but not really. Really only the matchup you have to worry about is Warrior, in my opinion. That's the only one that you have to actually, worry about. So I hope you all enjoyed this guide. I enjoyed making the guide, and I'm going to be making a guide on the budget deck in the future. And actually, it's a little bit different than this deck, only because the Vulgar Homunculus really helps into the Odd Rogue matchup, but into the Quest Rogue matchup, the Prince Keleseth allows for an increase in tempo that allows you to close up the game before they finish their quests. So, there are a few little differences like that, along with the Raid Leader in the budget deck, which allows you to apply a lot more pressure in the beginning of the game than the other deck potentially can. It basically, like, the decks are very similar, but there are some differences, so I'm going to make an entirely new guide on it in the future, and hope you guys enjoy that one just as much, because honestly, the win rates are about equal and about the same ranks with all of these, and I don't know. I very much enjoyed this deck. It's simple, easy to pilot, and I know I said that this guide was going to be shorter, but it is still about 20 minutes long, so I am sorry, but I hope you guys enjoyed the in-depth guide that I gave to you. Because honestly, I just want to be here to help you guys, and if you guys actually find the length an issue, if you guys tell me in the comments, I'll actually actively try to make it better. But as it stands, I really like just rambling because it makes sure that I don't really forget anything, and if I think of anything later, I just throw it in, which, I don't know, I feel like it helps get the most information across. But if you guys want it to be shorter, I can make it a little more structured right from the beginning rather than rambling. And if I forget something, I'll put it in the description or comments at the end of the video, if that's what you want. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned a ton. Thanks a lot for watching. See ya.